All right. Well, welcome back, friends, to Hope for a Better Life. I'm David Roth, pastor of the New Church of Boulder Valley, and here we have my friend Ethan McCardle, Sunrise Chapel in Tucson, and we're happy to be back to bring another episode of What in the World is Going On in the Bible.
Thanks
That's
so much, Dave. Yeah.
how are you this day?
Beautiful. It's been extremely warm in Tucson, and today it's dropping back down into the high 70s. So
Nice.
it was cool getting up, and the sun was out, and the sky was bright, and just in a really good mood. How about you?
Doing well. It's also a beautiful day here in Colorado, and yeah, sunny as typical, and feeling excited to talk again. It's been a while since we filmed one of these, so good to get back together. So,
Absolutely. Getting the band back together.
right.
That's right.
Indeed. Well, today we thought we would look at the story of the Tower of Babel, which is the next major story in the sequence that we have here. And, it's an interesting story, I think, because, there's a lot of things that are confusing, like why did as the text says, God confused their language? Is that really what happened? And it's actually kind of a good pinnacle story to what transitioning from this made up history that people had in the Bible, where people loved these stories that carried this spiritual meaning, and they knew that that's what was happening. They knew these weren't literal stories that they had to believe actually happened, but they were allegorical stories that carried a spiritual meaning with them. And we're told through Swedenborg's writings that true history or actual history begins the next chapter, chapter 12, with the call of Abram. So this is kind of the last of the tales exclusively carry just spiritual meaning, but aren't literally true. Do you have any initial feelings about the story or things you want to throw out there?
Well, just that last part reminded me of something. I don't know that I've ever thought of it this way until you were just talking about it like that, but it sets the table for sort of enter the part of human history where we're losing touch with the reality and power of the spiritual world. And what does that mean, not just for our individual lives, but sort of for where we are on our spiritual journey as a human race? And it's sort of like we're more remote from a living sense of who the Lord is and the life that would lead us to heaven. So it also sets the table for what's the path back.
Yeah,
Uh,
that's a great point. You think about that. It's kind of like in the creation story, God's doing all this stuff and just giving the human race all these gifts. And you sort of see human beings walking away from that throughout these different stories in different ways. And this is an actual moving away from that, which you'll see in the text, like they moved away from the east, which represents moving away from the Lord. But then the Lord or Jehovah has to call them back, like Abram. It's called the call of Abram. Like, all right, let's come back. I know
right.
you walked away, but we need to see if we can bring you back. Which I like. I love that picture of the idea of the Lord calling us back into His presence, where we can find happiness and joy. So
And I don't know if I'm allowed to do this, but because I love the call of Abram, and I'm really looking forward to doing that one. But just to connect the dots a little bit, our theology unpacks the beginning of that story, where he's called away from his land and away from his father's house to a land that only the Lord can show him, as that need to leave behind this old mindset of my way, my plans, my preconceptions about what my life is for. That's what's getting in the way. That's what has to be left behind. And so this story is an image of that mindset, that very mindset that is sort of where the allegorical spiritual history and the literal history of the time meet in people's unwillingness to see more deeply what it means to love the Lord and love the neighbor and make that what your life is about. That's in effect not the place where Genesis 12 picks up. It picks up in a place where people are in an idolatrous, self-oriented, world-oriented, and generally sort of sad place in their spiritual history. So it's kind of like the Tower of Babel is explaining to us why that is instead of just dropping us into Genesis 12. So I know we're spending a lot of time on the introduction, but I'm fascinated by how that part of the series connects and sets us up for what's coming.
Well, it's that whole duality that's presented to us throughout our life and through all humans, is that we need to believe that everything comes from the Lord, but we have to act as if it all comes from ourselves. It's just this dance that we have to do, and you can get quite messed up if you just live that track of it's all about me and I've got to do it all myself, instead of connecting with the Lord and saying, all right, Lord, I know there's a spiritual component here. I know you're there, and with my free will, I'm going to act with your instructions that you give me so I can have the best life that I can, knowing that you're there, that you're guiding me, and all that's good is from you. And it's hard because we are given that sense of self-life, what we talked about in other episodes. We're given the feeling that life is our own, but we're also given the truth that, you know what, you're a vessel. You're receiving all this life. So figure out the balance, my man.
Yeah. Your life is your own and it's not about you.
Right. Right.
What an amazing thing. And so you see in this story what happens when we're on the precursor to that, which is my sense that my life is my own and it's all about me.
Yeah.
That's where this story starts, essentially.
Let's make a name for ourselves. I mean, that's what the story talks about, how the whole, well, should we get into the story? Is it time?
Yeah. But what a thought. Let's give it a shot.
There you go. Well, let me just read part of the beginning just because I have it here. It says, now the whole earth had one language and one speech. And it came to pass as they journeyed from the east that they found a plain in the field of Shinar, and they dwelt there. So let's just stop there for a moment and unpack that a little bit. What's springing out of you as you hear that?
Well, you mentioned it earlier, but from the east is interesting to me, that the implication is what's being left behind. So unlike the opening of Genesis 12, where Abram's being called to leave behind an old mindset, in this story, you're called out of that sense that the Lord and the angels are close to you, that the way is clear, that doing what you can with what you understand to be the most loving thing just this moment is enough and you don't need anything more. That you're leaving behind your contentment with that way of thinking and being. And we talked about this a little bit before we started recording, and it's a longer discussion for a longer time maybe, but it's worth mentioning that all of these genealogies, and there are so many of them in the Old Testament as a precursor to Jesus's arrival in the New Testament, you see it happening again. But in these Old Testament narratives, a lot of that begatting,
Right.
The description of the family relationships is really about describing the trajectory as we move away from the family of God, determining our reality, more to the family of man or humankind determining our reality, and how that creates a shift in our mind and in our heart. So those were some of the first things that went through my mind just listening to that first little piece of scripture. It's fascinating.
Yeah, sort of fast forwarding through a lot of history by naming all these different generations to get down to this place where this shift is going to happen. But I find it interesting that the earth had one language, and it's a beautiful thing because what it pictures, what it talks about is that people are coming from a place of love and charity. When people are in love and charity, they have one language, they have one lip. It doesn't matter what beliefs got you there because it's what's in your heart. I actually have a passage that I love that says a little bit about this. It says, they all had one lip. This is from Swedenborg's writings. They all had one lip. That is, they all had one doctrine. The doctrine is one when all are in mutual love or in charity.
Mm.
So mutual love and charity unite us. And it's So interesting. If you just look in the, just do a search of how many different, let's say, Christian religions there are, there's hundreds of different denominations because we all think we're right and we all think everyone else is wrong. I mean, that tends to be the case as well. We pick apart doctrine and say, well, because you believe that, I'm going to separate from you. We're going to have a different church and so forth. And instead of, well, what is the point of all this doctrine? Well, it's to teach us to love one another and love God, right? So when we depart from that, we that's moving away from the East, as you talked about. But when we have one lip, we have one language, we have one, it's universal, which is love, right?
Hmm.
That's what unites. It's cool.
Yeah, the we could really go into an entirely separate episode on the concept of mutual love. And by the way, just to insert a here's what's coming, we've also been in conversation about how we just were off to the races with these ideas we cared about, and we haven't done a whole lot of contextualizing yet of what's our source material and how do we arrive at some of these conclusions. So that's coming next, just to promise that. And we felt comfortable just sharing with you things we care about and hope for out of this series as a starting point, and then dropping that in. So a vision of things to come. But one of the things that I was thinking about while you were talking is this concept of mutual love, the way it's described in our theology, is this inviolate place within our soul, actually, that is our connection with the Lord, that's what mutual love is and where it comes from. And so you sort of think of, well, that deepest place in you, your soul, is the source of that. And it's saying, no, there's something that even transcends, your soul level experience of inner life, that is about God's connection within your soul. That is the source of love. It not only does it not come from you, it can only come from God. And it's that link that we have to what love actually is from God that is even above the experience of the human soul, which I think is a fascinating concept. So,
Yeah.
when it's talking about being of one lip, it's also talking about that transcendent connection with a God of love that they had inside their soul,
Mm.
in a way that we lost and had to sort of remember again, and the pain that it caused to lose that and to have to regroup is some of what's in here too.
Yeah, I don't know if this is what I hear. I hear you saying this idea that sort of they're aware of that connection within God. God
Mm.
was right within inside, and they were right there. And now we have to kind of go outside of ourselves. And even though the Lord is still flowing in all the time with love and light, we have to find a way to connect that by learning truth from the outside and creating vessels that God can flow into, the Lord can flow into. And so it's a more difficult journey, so to speak, instead of it just being right there, a perception, an inward knowing that the Lord is there and guiding us. We have to go find it, which is hopefully what we can help all of us do.
Yeah. We nodded at this a couple episodes ago, and just because I enjoy seeing these connections and just how deep they are between the stories, we nodded at that a little bit in Cain and Abel, and that journey you were describing is the mark of Cain. Yeah, which is it's fascinating. That idea that you won't have perception the way you once did, but there's a path to me. It's through the word this way. And here's how you can get started with it. Reminds me a little bit of something somebody said. We do a grief group here once a week. And somebody said something that's just been resonating so deeply with me, having experienced a huge loss in their life of a family member. She said in tears, I believe there's a life on the other side of this. It's not the same life, but it's a life.
Yeah,
There's something that feels connected to this there.
beautiful. Thank you. Yeah. Well, yeah, it's humbling to see to hear those stories and to know that we all have those pains and hurts, and we're just trying to find our way to healing and hope. And what's beautiful about, I believe, the teachings of Swedenborg is that it shows us such hope and that, you know, there's so many people that I run into where the Bible makes no sense to them and or just has no meaning for them. And to know that it's actually the Lord speaking to us and present with us. The Lord is present. It's not just words on a page, but God is there and
Mm.
can connect with us. It's like a doorway. And just to find hope in that, and that there's so much more to know. And it's not just knowing, again, it's a feeling too. It's more than that. So yeah,
We're being pursued by God as we open the Word and we're seeking,
yeah,
just in that simple, humble spirit. What new does God have to say to me today? We can come into that recognition, like we were saying, I think it was last time, not only that we're never alone, but that God's actually been in pursuit of us from that kind of love.
standing at the door and knocking,
Yeah.
so urgently pressing, hoping to be received, or I don't remember that exact quote, but maybe you do.
Yeah. Urging and pressing to
Urging
be
him,
received.
yeah,
Yeah.
but not, yeah, not forcing.
Yeah. I think it's more the urgency of, oh, my child, if you only knew.
Yeah.
Huh.
Oh, Jerusalem, Jerusalem. Yeah, as Jesus is coming in, weeping for, I've sent you all these messages, these prophets, and you're just not getting it. You're just not waking up. That's grieving me. It's causing me grief. Um,
That's very powerful to think of this time of year.
yeah. Well, so back to the story, right? So the they had one lip, then they departed from the east. So it's a picture of what the church at that time, or God's connection with the human race, the people at that time, how they departed from that connection or departed from that mutual love. Instead of making that the focus, they decided to focus on theology and doctrine instead, which started to cause problems. So, what happens in the story? So, what they do is they wanted to build this tower, right? Let's make a name for ourselves. Let's build our own way up to heaven. We don't need God. We can figure it out ourselves. Is kind of the way I'm seeing the story. Is like we can build bricks. We're not going to use. I mean, the details of the story are all expounded, but stones that are unhewn picture truths from the Lord's word that we receive without trying to manipulate them and change them for our own desires. But making bricks is like we're making our own truths. We're making up our own ideas about how things work, and we're going to build a tower based on that. And it's just a great picture of the rationalization process that we can go through when we want something it's our own desire. We're not really checking in with the Lord to see if this is okay or not, but we're going to make it work, and we're going to fashion all these bricks and bake them and make our own tower, our own connection. And we all do this in our own little ways, of course, but this was a picture of what that connection with the human race was, or God's church on earth was doing at the time. But it's also a reminder what we can do ourselves
Yeah.
sometimes.
Yeah. You were putting me in mind of Jesus saying, which of you, as you would set about to build a tower,
Hmm.
wouldn't sit down first and count the cost, whether you would have enough to complete it? And I think implicit to that parable, which is what it is, just like this, is the idea that we start each day setting about to build a tower, as it were. We have certain goals and aspirations. We have in mind plans that we want to accomplish. And then the question is, what motivation is undergirding those plans?
Hmm.
And is it coming from the right place? And so you could picture your day kind of like we had a block box when I was a kid. It was one of my favorite things. And they were just these little handmade wooden blocks of different pieces, kind of like poor man's Legos. And so I would take a pile of them and I'd start constructing. But there was a difference between sort of constructing haphazardly versus having spent some time thinking in the morning, what kind of thing do I want to build?
Hmm.
And then proceeding from that place, more intention, right? And so maybe it's a inarticulate way to say it, but what kind of thing do I want to build with my life right now? And is that something that the Lord can bless, or is that something that's maybe coming from a different place? You
Right.
know, am I counting the cost of coming from my own ends, my own motivations, instead of trying to come from someplace higher? I mean, the irony of it is we think giving up our own ways is an incredibly costly thing, but actually, the heavenly life the Lord has in mind for us, there's you can't put a price tag on that.
Yeah.
And what we have to give up for it when we're in the right frame of mind and heart is totally worthless by comparison. But we don't start our life that way. We're not thinking that way in the beginning. There's a process we have to go through to arrive at that way of seeing and responding to our life. So anyway, I
Yeah.
just like thinking about that.
Well, it reminds me of something that someone's asked me a couple times, which is, how do I let go and let God? And, it's like one of those phrases that people like to use. How do I let go and let God? And it's an interesting question because the Lord doesn't want us to let go of our, we've got to work, we've got to do things. We're going to build a tower, so to speak, but we don't want to build a tower that's about making a name for ourselves. So it's like, how do I turn this over to the Lord? How do I involve, I guess I would term it this way. How do I involve the Lord in my plans? How do I include the Lord in my plans and not just, blindly go about, the rat race, constructing things for my own glory. And, I think most of us probably start off wanting to make a name for ourselves, so to speak, through business, or, want to be the best pastor, the best preacher of the biggest church, whatever motivates people. And that's about us. And we soon realize that that's A, it's not working, and B, it's not satisfying. And and C, it's missing the mark. It's not the point. So there's, like, I think what you're saying, there's a process there, right? Of moving
Yeah.
from this is about me to this, oh, this isn't about me, actually. And that is letting go and letting God. It's like, it's an attitude shift. It's not a hang our hands down and saying, all right, Lord, make things happen, move me the direction you want to move me. It's like, it's not going to happen. Lord's not
We're
going to.
not surrendering our agency or our effort. We're
Right.
reorienting it with the Lord's help. It
Yeah.
reminds me a little bit of the prayer of Solomon at the dedication of the temple, a different kind of tower, right?
Yeah.
Hear, Lord in heaven, your dwelling place. And when you hear, forgive. Forgive those times where I've set about building my life from a place that isn't seeking to follow your lead. Help me begin again.
Also, what Solomon asked for when the Lord said, I'll give you, whatever you want. And he doesn't ask for riches and fame. He asks for is a wise and understanding heart so he can govern the people. And because he asked for that, he got all the riches and wealth anyway. So it's
Seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these other things will
right.
be added to you. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So, so yeah, the tower building process, they build this tower, they try to build this tower. And this interesting part of the story where God looks down and goes, huh, I don't know if he actually said, huh, he didn't say, huh, but he's like, what's going on down there? Indeed, the people are one and they all have one language. And this is what they begin to do. It's like, well, there's nothing wrong with having one language. It's just that they departed from the East. That was the problem. So because they departed from the East, everything they're doing now isn't going to work. So it's not like God says, hey, you can't build a tower and I'm going to confuse your language because I don't like what you're doing. It's like you've left your first love, so to speak. You've left the point, which is to love one another as I have loved you, to love God, love your neighbor, to mutual love and kindness. So the whole thing's going to fall apart.
Yeah. This is maybe a strange connection, but I had a friend recently send me a track. I love all different kinds of music. We could do one of these on music and the way music shows up in the Word. I'd love that. But what he sent me was the song Africa Unite by Bob Marley, which is actually a beautiful song. And the opening line is, Africa unite, we're moving out of Babylon, we're moving toward the Father's land. So that, I think what triggered that thought for me and what you were saying is, we need to unite around God's purposes. That's what will unite us in the end, moving out of Babylon.
Yeah. Yeah, the name Babylon and babbling and all that stuff that comes from, like, you're babbling on. And, it says in the text that God confused their language, and it wasn't that God confused their language. And this is one of those interesting points that I don't know if we've highlighted it before or not, that the way that the word is often written is in the viewpoint of the person who's in the story. So where it says, like, God is angry, or God did this harmful thing or destroyed these people, it's not God doing that, because God's incapable of acting that way. God is nothing but love and mercy itself. But we perceive, or we project onto God, that you're messing me up. You're harming me. You're destroying my life. You're punishing me. But God doesn't punish anyone. Evil brings its own punishment. And so what's happening in the confusing of languages, you're seeing the result of departing from a life from charity, mutual love as your core, is that we're confused. We don't get each other anymore. If you look at our country right now, we're in a place of great division, right? It's like we don't understand each other anymore. There's so many different viewpoints and such separation. And to speak, not to judge our country, but have we lost our way? Have we moved from the East to say we're not going to focus on mutual love and charity anymore? We're going to focus on who's right and whose ideas are right and truth alone. Because that's what separates us and causes this dispersion and confusion.
Yeah. I don't know if this is a heretical connection or not, but something popped into my head as you were talking about the confusion of languages. Two things, actually. First of all, I thought about the prayer when you were talking about the language of the word being accommodated to our state. So, in the prayer we say, lead us not into temptation. And then you read in James, let no man say when he was being tempted that it comes from God. There's no way it could come from God. So what's going on there? And I think that's an example of what you're saying, that because when we're in spiritual struggle, it feels at some level, some fundamental level, like God, if God is sovereign, then God's also responsible for this.
Right.
And so the word anticipates that in our experience and then answers it on the other side of the semicolon. No, God doesn't lead us into temptation, even though it feels that way. God only ever delivers us from evil. So, I really like thinking about that. But I was also just wondering about the idea that here you have the confusion of tongues, the confusion of language, and it seems reconciled by Pentecost in the book of Acts, where the Holy Spirit alights on the enlightened as tongues of fire, and they come from all the nations under Jerusalem, it says, and it's coming to them in each of their own languages, and they all understand each other.
Yeah. No, thank you.
They're all hearing again.
Right. Even though they all had those different natural languages, that was that universal cause or purpose that united them, and they all understood. And it's such a beautiful experience when you have that, when people get together, even though they have different backgrounds, different opinions and stuff, and they work towards a common goal. Just the beauty of that. And people aren't arguing about why are we helping this person? Our goal is to help this person. And so here we are helping. And it's just a beautiful picture of what life can be like.
And that the Lord sort of setting us up throughout the story of the word to understand progressively that that's the point, and to begin to wait on him that way. I was thinking about also teaching 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade, which I only did for a year. A lot of it was classroom discipline, but it was fun. And one of the things that we covered was this idea of statements that seem contradictory or not like we would have pictured God to be. And the insight that came to me was to say to them, well, particularly in the context of the Old Testament, the children of Israel in the deepest sense, in those Old Testament narratives, is about our own mental landscape, right? So what you're reading in those stories is the children of Israel's read of God, given their state and the things that they were going through. It was a very reward punishment system, right? And you see him planting seeds to try to move them progressively to a deeper way of seeing and responding to him. But that's where they were. So that's the way the images show up. And inside of those images is that deeper reality, that deeper message of love that was preserved for us until a time when we were able to see and respond to that under the surface text. Right. And so it's actually a measure of the Lord's mercy that those deeper messages were kept safe under this appearance of God that was really a function of how they were receiving and relating to God, not God, not the divine itself, you know.
Right. Yeah, it's like you blaming the police for giving you a ticket when you're speeding, right? It's like,
yeah,
or blaming the judge when you end up fined when you actually committed a crime, or blame your parents when they took away your phone for 5 hours when you disobeyed them and so forth. It's sort of, it's just how we do it. We just view it that way, and this is shown throughout the Old Testament. It shows up quite a lot. But it's also interesting that when God does show up, right? Jesus Christ, God in human shows up. It's not the kind of person you don't see an angry God, right?
Right.
So, which is kind of cool.
Yeah, this idea too that when you're in sort of reward punishment mode, the goal is obedience. But when you've transitioned from sort of that way you grew up, because who didn't have some of that view of life as a little kid?
Right.
But as you get older, you start to have this conviction in your mind and your heart of, no, this is a more loving and wise way to live. I'm happier when I'm thinking this way and speaking this way and trying to act this way toward my neighbor. Enter Jesus and the way of love that's being modeled for us that we weren't ready for until that point, where we're starting to recognize that that's, you know, obedience is a starting point, and it's a necessary one. It lays a foundation, but we're not to get stuck there. It's supposed to launch us into a deeper reason for being.
Right. And it's cool that the word accommodates to us throughout our growth. It opens up more and more and can appeal to now our rational minds. Now it's permitted to enter with understanding into the mysteries of faith, as it says in True Christianity through Swedenborg's writings, is that, yeah, we're supposed to be able to understand this stuff. We're not supposed to shut down our understanding and just blindly believe and have, blind faith is not real faith. We actually are, it's okay to ask questions. It's okay to pursue and to wonder. That's how we grow and develop. So that's one of the things I love about the theology of the new church, is that there's so much that you can dig into and the supply. You don't have to, but if you have questions, you can go on till you're tired and worn out.
Yeah, which is very different than remembering myself as a parent of young kids. Eat your vegetables. Why? Because it'll make you healthy. Why? So you can grow up big and strong. Why? Because you need to eat your vegetables. Just eat them.
Get up.
Right. And the Lord doesn't do that. The Lord loves that we're curious and asking questions, and that if we're doing that affirmatively, in other words, from a seeking of truth, from a desire to understand more deeply what it means to have a meaningful life, we'll keep being led through those questions to a deeper and deeper understanding, and I think perception of the way,
Right. I think enlightenment comes from the Lord when we are pursuing with the right motivation. The Lord will enlighten us and show us what we need to know.
It was interesting, something about this part of the conversation, because it's a pretty short little account. If you count it up, Genesis 11, this Tower of Babel narrative, accounts for 9 verses. So much in 9 verses. And the landing point is the confusion of the language of all the earth. And so we talk about babies babbling,
Yeah.
or if somebody's, kind of going on and on but not getting to the point, we say that they're babbling. This is where that comes from. I'm fascinated by things like this, that there's this ancient spiritual wisdom that's descended into our common speech and perception, but we've forgotten where it came from. And, just like every major civilization in the world has some version of a creation narrative and some version of a flood narrative, it's amazing how many cultures and civilizations in the world have some version of, and then our tongues were confused and we lost our way. Some version of, we're all speaking differently now. And it's not to cast aspersion on the fact that we all have different languages, but we're given this fascinating teaching in our theology that suggests that when we wake up in the other world, when our life in this world is drawn to a close and we're waking up in the other world, they don't use a language like we use here. And it's a shared and common spiritual language. And we wake up knowing how to speak it.
Yeah.
Because it's the language of the heart. It's the language of love.
Yeah.
So that the idea that all over the world and from time immemorial, those realities have been seated in human consciousness and keep being pointed to, and they find their culmination in the word. I just love, speaking of being relentlessly pursued by God.
Yeah. That makes me think too of communication with, I'm thinking of communication with loved one or partner, for example, where it's just not working. And it's like,
Yeah.
we're talking past each other or just don't understand. And usually it's because one of us is impatient or angry or some negative emotion is dominating our efforts to communicate, and we're just missing it. And so it's like it doesn't work. It doesn't work when we're not coming from love and mercy and compassion and patience. It just so all kinds of stuff we talked about there. But so have we babbled on long enough? That's the question.
Nice connection. Yeah, I mean, there's so much more we could talk about. I've so enjoyed this conversation. I guess what's going through my mind and heart is, do you have a takeaway from this? Something that's sort of buoying your spirit as you leave this place and, until we see each other again.
Yeah, well, I love this conversation. I love the imagery and the story, and for me, it's just reminding myself to not depart from the East. Just remember that being connected with the Lord and the resources the Lord offers me, if I'm willing to accept them, will allow me to have the connections I want with other people, will allow me to have conversations that work, will allow me to enjoy life, at all the things that I want and hope for, and the Lord wants for me as well. So that imagery is what's going to stick with me today. How about?
I'm thinking about let us make a name for ourselves. Name in Scripture points to quality. We've spoken so much about what motivates us undergirding our thought and speech and action, and yet it's so easy to have a conversation about that, to have an intellectual awareness of it, leave the room and forget.
Yeah.
And so, as I'm going out of here, whether I'm headed into a staff meeting or headed to the grocery store or going on a date night with my wife or showing up at this weekend's community meeting, am I out to make a name for myself, or am I seeking to find some good to connect to and then do something about it? Because I think that has more of that, then I'm not making a name for myself as much as I am remembering the names of the Lord and seeking to have those qualities connect more to my life. So I like thinking about that.
Love that. Thank you. Yeah. Well, friends, we thank you so much for being with us for another episode, and we will catch up with you soon. But wish you peace and offering hope for a better life. Right.
Let your mercy, O Lord, be upon us according as we hope in you. Love and peace, everybody.